virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vaxxed. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you had the replacement theory.
I said
my colleagues.
The time belongs to the gentleman from
Kentucky. I denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. And to say that I created a film that encourages blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words.
It's the witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm not censoring the witness. I'm not censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's my time, and I've given it to the witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks.
Well, vaccines are magic. They can save lives.
Everybody thinks, when they hear, okay, you're going to say lockdown until there's a vaccine. And as Bill Gates said, a magical vaccine. They're thinking that, the vaccine's going to do what we've been told vaccines do, which is to give everybody who gets one lifetime immunity and no, major health problems. What are the chances they're actually going to get a vaccine like that? I would say 0. Here's what I predict. I predict you're going to be seeing Bill Gates and Tony Fauci week after week dampening expectations about the vaccine. And they were originally saying it's a magical vaccine we're going to give to everybody and everybody is going to be immune. And they're going to say, well, actually only 80% of people will get immune. And then they'll say 70%, and they'll say 50%, and then they'll say 20%. But it's still worth it to have 20%. And they'll try to sell us on that.
All right, breaking news. Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer just announced moments ago that its coronavirus vaccine is 95% effective.
Meg, we should point out that Pfizer shares are up by about 3% on this news. Obviously, more good news there.
91%.
90% efficacy rate.
This is a great vaccine.
Great day for humanity, great day for science, great day for the markets. Check this out, because
it's got to be purchased, manufactured, and then there has to be money there for it to be purchased. And so the world needs to put up more money.
Their vaccine's efficacy against COVID dropped from 96% to 84%.
80% effective after just one dose.
Just a single dose.
A reduction of 75%.
Those lines go down.
Which fell below 50%.
You can't even keep up with this because it's moving so quickly.
42%.
30 to 40%.
Vaccine provides just 33% protection.
We know no vaccine lasts forever, so the protection starts to wane a bit, and that's what the boost is all about.
And then they're going to say, well, the vaccine, it's not actually lifetime immunity. The immunity only lasts for 1 year, 1 season, and actually maybe not even that, maybe only 2 or 3 months, and then you have to get another one.
It may not offer protection sort of for a lifetime, right? It's not a one and done.
Booster, so-called third dose, it is confusing to people.
It really is going to be about focusing on getting that shot just once a year. Much simpler, much easier to do.
Don't worry so much about the number of boosters. Worry about when you got your last booster.
Okay.
Is the CEO of Moderna, Stefan Bancel. What a blowout quarter. Congratulations to you.
Oh, yeah, we definitely think it's going to be like a flu shot. COVID is not going away.
Tuesday.
And that's why we're also working on combining flu and COVID, so it's easier.
You are the COVID company then.
The new updated COVID-19 vaccine is the most...
And that's my prediction. And I could be wrong, but I would say 0. And all you have to do is look at the flu vaccine.
Well, thank you for illuminating all of this for us today. I want to leave on a positive note, but it's like, wow, we're screwed.
Paxlovid, once considered a wonder drug to beat back COVID-19, may not be so mighty after all. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine on Wednesday suggests the antiviral drug does little or nothing for both fully vaccinated or unvaccinated people who have at least one risk factor for severe COVID. It did little to shorten the duration of symptoms. It is still unclear as to Paxlovid's impact on patients 65 years and older, as that group only accounted for under 6% of the study subjects. Participants recorded daily symptom severity on a 4-point scale. 0 was absent, 1 was mild, 2 moderate, and 3 severe. The included symptoms were cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, feeling feverish, had chills or shivering, muscle or body aches, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, headache, sore throat, and stuffy or runny nose.
Adults who had confirmed COVID-19 with symptom onset in the past 5 days were randomly assigned with Paxlovid or a placebo to take every 12 hours for 5 days. Patients who were fully vaccinated against COVID and patients who had never been vaccinated against COVID were eligible for participation in the study. Now, kind of shocking that a drug that costs $1,300 for a 5-course is showing in a randomized controlled trial to not really relieve COVID symptoms. That's a lot of money to pay for something that provenly doesn't work, it seems.
Yeah, and actually the federal government gave Pfizer $12 billion for Paxlovid during the pandemic, and they were able to sell $20 billion worth of it before finding out, apparently, that it doesn't do anything. And this is part of a larger trend of the medical community, and particularly big pharma, both taking advantage and repeatedly selling the American public a bill of goods when it came to COVID-19. They, of course, routinely mocked therapeutic treatments like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, saying that they were a fish tank cleaner or a horse dewormer, even though these medicines have been used for human treatment in different dosages for decades. And basically just wanted the government to pour all of its money into propping up the vaccine development among these big pharmaceutical companies. They didn't want people to take potentially effective therapeutics because they would take away from the desire for people to develop a vaccine. And then they had their own therapeutic treatments like Paxlovid, which doesn't even work, and made $20 billion on it. It was just such a total racket from start to finish. And I don't know how the United States is going to get people to trust the medical community again after this, because pretty much every part of their response to the pandemic ended up being either completely made up or proven not true months later.
Right. A Harvard analysis of this drug concluded it costs $13.38 to produce the 5-course treatment. They are charging $1,390 for the 5-course treatment. They're profiting off of this drug obscenely. That's a huge profit margin. And when we look at what happened during the pandemic, you had all of these big corporations saying we're experiencing incredible inflation. It's true that there were supply chain disruptions and companies had increased input costs because of this, and they raised prices proportionally. But then there were other companies that entirely took advantage of the economic climate we were in thanks to the pandemic. When we look at what profit margins were for the previous 20 years, they averaged about 11.4% during the pandemic. But during the COVID pandemic, in just the first few years, we saw profit margins soar above 40%. When we look at the money made off of price increases, from the 70s to 2019, 1979 to 2019, we find that the majority of price increases, 62%, that money went to workers' wages. During the pandemic, 54% of the money made off of price increases did not go to additional input costs because of inflation. It certainly didn't go to workers' wages. 54% of the money made off of price increases during the pandemic went directly to corporate profits. These are corporations price gouging, raising prices on necessary things like an antiviral drug during a pandemic, raising prices on food and gasoline just so they can line their pockets more These are the economic circumstances that led to the 10 richest men in the world doubling their fortunes during the pandemic from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion just in the first 2 years of COVID. The wealth disparity we're seeing in this country as a result of somewhat a failure to regulate industry, a failure to keep in check unrealistic corporate profits when we think about the sustainability of an economy. You know, it's a failure on the economic front. It's a failure by our political leaders as well.
Yeah, a lot of politicians obviously made tons of money in stocks by trading on big pharma's stocks rising when the federal government started awarding those contracts for the vaccine development. And some got called out for it, but some of them not so much. I want to go back for a second about just the way that the American people were repeatedly lied to about pretty much everything in regards to COVID-19. And I mean, there is obviously a time period in which you can have some forgiveness for people who genuinely didn't know what COVID-19 was, didn't really understand how to fight it. But instead of just admitting that they didn't really know what was going on, in the name of, I guess, suppressing panic, the medical establishment and the public health bureaucracy instead decided that they were just going to make things up as they went along. They have admitted in congressional testimony that the 6 feet rule for social distancing was completely arbitrary, that it wasn't based on really any scientific method. There have been multiple studies now proving that masks were not this super effective way of fighting COVID-19 spread the way it was claimed to be, at least in part because most people don't have a proper seal with an N95. But even then, it's found that masks were not super effective. There was a Johns Hopkins University study that came out last year that found, and this is, I think, the biggest knock against everything that the public health bureaucracy did. It found that the lockdowns and the lockdown-esque policies that continued for months, if not years afterwards, did not save as many lives as they caused by creating deaths of despair and deaths from medical neglect, i.e. people not going to the doctor because they were encouraged not to go get their normal screenings or checkups because they would be taking away beds essentially from people who were suffering from COVID. So you have a rise in suicide, a rise in mental health issues, you have learning loss among children. I mean, everything that came along with the lockdowns ended up causing more harm than lives it saved from protecting high-risk people from COVID-19. Now we find out that this Paxlovid drug, which again, Pfizer has made $20 billion plus on, also doesn't work. This is the largest public health failure in the history of perhaps the world, at least in the United States of America.
You spout a lot of conspiracy think. And I think that there are a lot of people in this country that want another choice, but they're not going to vote for a conspiracist. So what do you say?
I said at the beginning of the pandemic that vaccines were not going to prevent transmission. I said that because I was reading the science. I was reading the monkey studies that showed that they didn't prevent transmission in monkeys. So I knew they weren't going to do it in humans. I was called a conspiracy theorist, and now everybody admits that. I said that COVID lockdowns were going to be very, very harmful to children particularly. They would damage our economy, and they would not prevent the spread of a respiratory virus. And the reason I said that, I was reading the science. I was reading pandemic protocols over the past 40 years. I was called a conspiracy theorist. I said the masks were not going to work to prevent the spread of the disease, and that they would probably do more harm than good. And now everybody agrees with that. I said the same thing about social distancing, that it wasn't science-based. And Tony Fauci has now acknowledged that's true. Tell me a theory that you think I got wrong. To show me facts. I'm not somebody, I don't say things unless I have a factual basis. But what the defense of the political establishment is that anybody who questions reigning political orthodoxies is discredited and marginalized and demonized by characterizing them as a conspiracy theorist. But I don't know any place where I have advocated a theory that is not factual based. Tell me what it is. I'm happy to answer it.
You sound more open to vaccine protocols as long as there's testing that backs them than you used to. That you used to be like, look, all vaccines are more about big pharma spreading their wings than they are about controlling anything, and that they're all very suspicious. I think that you have changed on that, and frankly,
Chris, I have to object. Chris, I have to object to that. You got to show me a statement I said. Like I can tell you this. What I've said from the beginning is that I'm not anti-vaccine. I've said that for 15 years. I've said I wanted safe vaccines. I want to have the same kind of rigorous pre-licensing science that is required for other medical products and other medical devices, which are placebo-controlled trials that are longer term. For the I took 3 vaccines when I was a kid, and I was fully compliant. My kids took 72 vaccines, and they got all their vaccines. So I'm not anti-vaccine. But not one of those 72 vaccines has ever had a pre-licensing safety study, which means nobody can tell you whether that product is going to avert more problems than it causes. What I think people should have is informed choice. And what I especially don't want is the public health agencies being controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. FDA gets 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical companies, and NIH is allowed, which is the incubator for new pharmaceutical products, is allowed to collect royalties on the products it develops. So that is a conflict of interest, and I think we ought to try to get rid of those kind of conflicts of interest. And since that time, I think you and I grew up in an era, Chris, where we expect the government to lie to us. So I think part of being a citizen in a democracy is to question authority, to question everything. Trust in the experts is not a feature of science, and it's not a feature of democracy. It is a feature of totalitarianism, and it's a feature of religion. But we live in a democracy, and it's science, but our policies have to be science-based. And so we need to question everything. And when new facts come, we need to question them again. They put freedom of speech in the First Amendment of the Constitution because all of the other rights depended on it. A government that has the capacity to silence its opponents has the power to commit any kind of atrocity. And we saw during COVID that, beginning around in late January, early February, the government began actively promoting the censorship of speech on the social media. And that was something new in the American experience. And I just won a case against President Biden because of what he did during that period, Biden versus Kennedy, which is now about to go to the US Supreme Court. But as soon as they figured out that we were going to put up with that there was no uproar in the media, they did go after all of the other rights in the Constitution. And we're now witnessing this dismaying contest between the 2 oldest presidential candidates in history. Those 2 men, during their terms as president, both worked to close our Main Street businesses for a year, 3.3 million businesses, with no due process, no scientific citation, no public hearings, no environmental impact statement. They just told us to shut them down. Those policies that both of them engineered transferred $4 trillion from the middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. They created 500 new billionaires in 500 days, a billionaire a day. Today, together, they ran up a greater debt than all previous presidents combined since George Washington. 2 men with a single term in office each. Now, they don't want us talking about those things. They want us instead to hate each other, to fear the other guy. But to young Americans, they look like 2 sides of the same coin. If we vote for either of them again, we can expect, and we will deserve, more of the same. the annihilation of our middle class, the further impoverishment of working poor, more chronic disease, more epidemics, more environmental destruction, more debt, more war, and fewer constitutional rights.